Welcome, my friends, to another episode of Shoot First, Ask Questions Later. Today, we have the immense chus to be joined by Rabbi Aryeh Lebowitz, who is the director of Smicha at the Rabbi Isaac Elchanan Theological Seminary, otherwise known as Yeshivas Rabbeinu Yitzchak Elchanan, as well as the Mara D'Asra of Pesak of North Woodmere. He was previously a Rebbe at Landers College for Men and a Rebbe at the DRS Yeshiva High School, all located, the latter located in the Five Towns. Rabbi Lebowitz is also well known for his iconic 10-minute halacha series, as well as his numerous publications, including Hakona Olamo, and his most recent one, which of course we must mention, Kinyan Halacha, from the Pesakim to the Poskim. And while we can certainly spend countless hours delving into Rav Lewitz's Chidushei Torah, I actually asked him to share with us a tshuva from his Rebbe Mufak, Morenu HaRav Hershel Schachter Shlita. So this is a little bit awkward because generally, when I bring someone on the podcast, they tell me about a posek of yesteryear, who's no longer with us. And Rav Schachter should live on Me'eva Esrim Shana, or Mashiach should come first. So it's a little bit of an awkward position to be in, but maybe I suspect most of our listeners have heard about Rav Schachter, but I think it's worth giving just a general overview of who he is and really like the writings, the scholarship. You don't have to go through the full CV, but what should we know about Rav Schachter before getting into the particulars of the tshuva and Eretz HaTzvi that we'll be looking at today?
Hi, first of all, thank you so much for having me. It's great to be talking to you. It's a really wonderful podcast and a wonderful endeavor to be discussing matters of halacha and introducing people to fascinating svarim and authors. I would also like to highlight and maybe underscore a little bit the idea that you have just mentioned, that Rav Schachter, Baruch Hashem, is alive and well, comes to yeshiva every day and says shir every day. And I think that sometimes we have a tendency to appreciate Gedolei Torah when they are no longer with us. And we have a tendency to try to find out more about them, and we read their biographies, and yet we have access to the... One thing I can tell you is, just like we today talk about Rav Moshe Feinstein and Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach and other Gedolei Torah who are no longer with us, in a generation from now, they will be talking about the Gedolei Torah who are alive today. Can you imagine if someone were to tell you that they had the opportunity to go hear Rav Moshe Feinstein all the time? I'm speaking about someone close to your heart. Rav Moshe Feinstein all the time. And they just chose not to. They just chose not to bother. It's unbelievable. How could you choose not to? But as you well know, Rav Moshe gave shiurim in the Lower East Side on Friday mornings. They were available to anybody. And how many people went? How many, I don't know if you ever asked Rabbi Tadner how many people used to go to those shiurim.
No, I was asking my great uncle who was on the Lower East Side, and he said a lot of people actually flocked to Rav Soloveitchik because he was the master orator, and Rav Moshe gave his shir on the Lower East Side. But meanwhile, his psukim really reached very far.
Right, right. But you would think just to get a glimpse, just to see him, just to be able
I
to
don't
have
know.
access to him.
It
So
reminds me, I didn't have the skills of learning directly in Rav Schachter's shir, except for when I was doing capstone, I think Hilchos Eruvin with him. But someone remarked to me that someone asked for a makor one time, and he said, "It's my own idea." Like you don't need someone dead to tell it to you. It's still a good svar, whether the author's alive or whether they're dead. It doesn't make a difference.
very good. Yes. And maybe that's what we'll talk a little bit about. So just to give it like a little of an idea of Rav Schachter, which again, I assume most of the audience basically knows that Rav Schachter has been a Rosh Yeshiva and our Yeshiva and Yeshivas Rabbeinu Yitzchak Elchanan for many, many decades. I probably, other than Rabbi Tendler, the longest tenure of someone being in our base medrash, being in our yeshiva, but uniquely, Rav Schachter is in our yeshiva 7 days a week, 2 starim a day. He's always there, always available. A very unique feature of a Rosh Yeshiva of his caliber, to always be around for any and every Talmud, or even just random people who walk off the street, come off the street to talk to him. He has incredible patience for people. He also has an incredible capacity for regaining focus on whatever he was doing prior to the conversation that he just had. You could interrupt him in middle of a thought and have a whole conversation with him, and then as soon as that conversation is over, he's right back into that thought. He has an incredible capacity to do that, and he's been sitting in our. I mean, the base medrash has changed, but the person in front of it hasn't for over 70 years, for close to 70 years, I should say. He's been in our yeshiva, probably by now 70 years. Yeah, 70 years. He came as a freshman in high school, and he's been in our yeshiva ever since. He never learned in a different yeshiva. To have who what I would consider to be the greatest living Torah giant on this continent, be in our yeshiva, or at least arguably the greatest living Torah giant. Everyone would have to say at least arguably the greatest living Torah giant on this continent, to be so accessible, so available for such a long time. That ultimately is what really sets him apart from most other Gedolei Torah and Rashi Yeshiva. But as far as his learning and his pesak halacha, I think he's often misunderstood. People think of Rav Schachter as like a computer, as this massive bucky. I remember he was once being honored at a dinner somewhere, and they referred to him as Rabbi Google. But that's not at all that does not at all capture the greatness, even from a learning perspective. Meaning, even if you leave aside the midos and the anivos and the sensitivity, and how emotional he is about the needs of the Jewish people, and leaving all of that aside, which it's impossible to, but still leaving all of that aside from a learning perspective, the ability to make connections and to see the world of Torah in klalim, in broad rules that could be applied to all over the place. Meaning, it's not just that I know this piece of Torah and that piece of Torah and that piece of Torah, and it's just that his warehouse of Torah knowledge is much greater than ours. It's that the quality of the Torah is much greater because he sees he sees the forest from the trees. Meaning he's able to see klalim, he's able to see rules, he's able to see principles in everything, and that's what he focuses on mostly. And many of his unique piskei halacha are simply applications of klalim that he developed, and that's why I wanted to talk today with you specifically about a piece in his initial sefer, his first sefer, Eretz HaTzvi. It's not a tshuva. He actually writes in the introduction. I know this is shoot first, but he writes in the introduction that this is not a sefer of halacha because he was advised as a young man when he published the sefer. I think he was in his 40s, but many of these essays were written when he was much younger. That he was advised that his first sefer should not be matters of halacha. His second sefer, Be'ikvei Atzon, has many more matters of halacha. But within Eretz HaTzvi, you find the foundations of all of his unique piskei halacha, because all of his lamdas is there in Eretz HaTzvi, and he has an extraordinary confidence to paskin halacha based on his understanding of the lamdas of a sugya. It's extraordinary. So he does have halachic writings, as I mentioned before. Be'ikvei Atzon, he wrote tshuvas over many decades for the OU. They haven't. I don't think they've officially published them. Although my friend Rabbi David Lebowitz published, no relation, but he published a number of Rabbi Belsky's and Rabbi Schachter's tshuvas from the OU in a book that he has on kashrus. And he, of course, probably most famously now, published many tshuvas during the pandemic, during the corona pandemic, and he was dealing with and that the truth is in those tshuvas more than his ability to apply klalim in the tshuvas during the pandemic. You really saw the command of the entirety of Torah, the entirety of halacha, meaning there were unprecedented things that were happening. And he was saying, oh no, but this is beferish in the halacha, it's a Magen Avram here or there.
And if I may, what I recall, I think Rav Schachter one time stated, you'll correct me if this is inaccurate, that it's not sufficient. You can't just be a posek in one limited area of halacha. one needs to have mastery to be a posek of kol haTorah kula, because one has to understand how it's a living organism, how the same principles many times could apply to, in Dine Manas to Hilchos Shabbos. I'm thinking about like that Nimuki Yosef about candle lighting at Erev Shabbos. How you just have principles that could fly across, and you need the forest, not just the trees.
And that's really the same meaning. That's really what he means by that is exactly this point of thinking in terms of klalim. That when you study a specific area of halacha, you may know every word of that area of halacha, but the ideas behind it and the klalim that govern it, if you don't see how it's applied elsewhere, you don't really fully understand the principles that are driving that halacha, and therefore you change one nuance, one detail, and you're not going to know if it really makes a difference. I was once talking. I had the opportunity to meet with a few rabbanim and Rav Asher Weiss, and one of my chaverim asked. We were in a room full of svarim of Rav Asher Weiss's svarim. So one of my chaverim just I don't know what possessed him, but he asked Rav Asher, when was the last time you bought a sefer? Meaning, like people give him svarim all the time whenever anyone writes something. So it led him into this whole conversation about svarim and about the utility of different svarim. We have these very narrow areas of halacha. Like my friend Rabbi Aryeh Wasserman, and this is a good example, wrote 2 big fat volumes on the halachos of yarmulke.
I see. Yes, I was just thinking of that.
Right. So Rav Asher said that like if some avrech in the mirror spent 12 years learning all the dinim of Shiluach HaKain, it's useful to me to have that as a resource. But as far if I needed to paskin halacha, even in Hilchos Shiluach HaKain, if I needed to paskin halacha, I would sooner go to Rav Asher Weiss than I would to the avrech who spent 12 years learning that area of halacha. So I think it's
right, understanding ideas of sveikos and chazakos, core principles that govern so many areas of halacha. And so the piece in Eretz HaTzvi that we're looking at today, it talks about the distinction between a gezerah midrabanan versus a malacha midrabanan, which sounds almost like splitting hairs for a moment. And I think that's going to be the beauty of it. Do you want to tell us just, it's a nice, I think it's about 10 pages, the piece, but Kitzer, what's his thesis here and how does his lumdus shine in it?
Yeah, so this is the reason I wanted to talk about this piece is because I think it's a really good example of where you hear Piskei Halacha and you're like, where did that come from? And it comes directly from his lamdas. There's so many Piskei Halacha I could share with you, some that are explicit in that piece and some that I've had the opportunity to ask Rav Schachter about in other contexts that really emerge from this piece. The basic thesis is that while we often think of 2 categories, we think of D'oraisas and Rabbanans. The reality is when it comes to Hilchos Shabbos, and he suggests along the course of this piece that maybe even outside of Hilchos Shabbos, but certainly in Hilchos Shabbos, there are in fact 3 categories. There's a malacha da'oraisa, which are the lamitas malachos, the avos, the toldos. Those are all malachos da'oraisa. Then there are malachos d'Rabbanan, where if you do a malacha in a certain way, that is a violation of a malacha, but only on a d'Rabbanan level. And then there's what's called the gzeira d'Rabbanan, that you can't say that by violating this din d'Rabbanan, you are doing a malacha on a d'Rabbanan level. For example, if a Chazal made a gzeira that one should not clap and dance on Shabbos, gzeira shemi yasakin klishir, lest they come to fix a musical instrument. So if someone is clapping on Shabbos or dancing on Shabbos, can you say, oh, you're violating fixing a musical instrument on a d'Rabbanan level? Certainly not. I'm not fixing anything. If someone is taking medication on Shabbos, you're going to say, that's grinding, midrabanan. No, I'm not grinding anything. I'm not, meaning not even midrabanan.
These are safeguards. These are gedarm, lest you come to do the actual malacha.
Exactly. And what Rav Schachter suggests is that there are different rules in halacha for malachas rabbanan and gzeros rabbanan. Most critically is that we are matir all gzeros rabbanan for a chol shein bo sakana, but not malachos drabanan. So when it comes to someone who's ill, who's a cholashein sakana, who's ill enough that they need to be in better, that as Rav Schachter often points out, that they're simply not functioning properly, that they're unable to function properly, so they can take medication on Shabbos. Why? Because taking medication is a gezerah drabanan, not a malacha drabanan. But to, let's say, although he discusses
Grind kalach or yad in an
exactly.
odd manner. I'm still doing the actual isser of grinding.
Right. So he actually discusses in that piece whether malacha kila achrayad is a malacha derabanan or a gzeira derabanan. But assuming that kila achrayad, which would make a lot of sense, that it would be a malacha derabanan, not a gzeira derabanan, then that's a very, very good example. So this comes up in a number of different contexts. Another very critical distinction, and I'll point out the contexts in a moment, but another critical distinction is whether the violation midrabanan, whether it's possible to violate on a drabanan level without a maisa, without doing anything, in a passive way. So a malacha, by definition, involves a maisa. You can only be violating a malacha if you're doing a maisa. But when you're not doing but a gezerah, you could be violating a gezerah even without doing a maisa. So that comes up in the context of the isser of let's say, for example, the isser of shihiyah on Erev Shabbos, which means an isser drabanan that you're not allowed to leave food on an open flame cooking into Shabbos unless it's already fully cooked.
I have to say, by the way, I have your article on preparing coffee on Shabbos on my table to read, and I know that's one of the key issues you deal with in there, which is setting a coffee maker before Shabbos, if it's shahir
Yes.
or not. So I'll find out the answer soon.
Yes, I think the most popular thing I've ever written is anything about coffee is the most popular. Anytime I give a shir about coffee, it's the most popular shir. Anytime people are very attached to their coffee. Um, yeah, so shihia means that you did it before Shabbos. You put the food on the fire before Shabbos. So that can't possibly be a malacha rabbanan because you're not doing anything on Shabbos. It's just sitting there on the flame. So shihia must be a gezerah midrabanan. The Bir Halacha quotes a machlokas if you could ask a guy to be machzir a solid food that is fully cooked to the fire on Shabbos for the sake of the Suda Shabbos. Meaning, can you do Amiru L'Nachri? In the simple level, it should be a shvus to shvus b'makom mitzvah. I'm asking a Nachri to do chazara, to put something back on a fire, and it's not bishul. I'm not asking him to cook; it's already cooked. So those who are machmir about this must hold that chazara is a gezerah and not a malacha.
Hmm.
So Amiru L'Nachri doesn't help because I don't need to be active to violate a gezerah. It could be happening on its own. So for sure, it could be happening when a Nachri does it for me, right? When a non-Jew does it for me, that's a gezerah. Had it been a malacha, then for sure you would make it less severe by asking a Nachri to do it. It would knock down the level of severity.
So this is remarkable. So we have what appears to be something that we would expect here during a sheer klali in the base medrash. We take the thumbs out, we start doing all the dips, and it sounds like a lot of fun. And then we close our notebooks and we go home. But actually, if we follow the lumdus to its logical conclusion, we have real nafkaminas lemaisa. This isn't just a fascinating Reb Chaim, but this actually has ramifications for how we practice halacha and how we sometimes, maybe I'll speak for myself, we're a little bit too cavalier in how willing we are to use a guy. It's funny, right? I think in Smicha, I was told this many times that we wind up using the Amir al-Akim as a heter instead of an isser.
Right. Yeah, that's what Rabbi Yisrael Reisman likes to say, that when he was a child, there used to be an Isser called Amir L'Nachri. Now apparently there's a Heter called Amir L'Nachri.
So it
But
made to the classrooms of REITs. I can attest
yes,
to that.
yes. Great. So the yeah, and just on this case alone, on Chazara alone, Rav Schachter disagrees with the Shmir Shabbos Kilchasa about whether you could set your hot plate on a timer on
Mhm.
Shabbos based on this, because he holds that it's a gezerah d'Rabbanan, and a gezerah d'Rabbanan, even if it happens by itself, like a timer where it turns it on by itself, is going to be
Interesting. So he
Shmir
doesn't he
Shabbos
doesn't
Kilchasa
even
make it.
he doesn't even this is Imtim Salomar, you are okay with the timers because Rav Moshe has that whole tshuva
Right,
against
right.
timers. So
Assuming
even
not
if you
like Rav
obviate
Moshe.
that tshuva, there's still another reason to be machmir.
Right. Right, exactly. So that's exactly. I'll give you another example. I don't know how many examples you want, but this one was a fascinating one that's not in print anywhere,
Ooh, we'll
as far
take
as
it.
I know. Rabbi Shai Schachter had the following shaila that came up in his community. There is a young autistic child, not so young, teenager, 15-year-old, and nonverbal, completely nonverbal. But even though completely nonverbal, is fully a bardas, definitely has full das. How do they know? Because they gave the kid an iPad and he communicates beautifully by typing through an iPad, articulately, intelligently, unbelievable. The human brain is such a
Yeah. And
fascinating.
my wife's a speech pathologist. I think they call them AAC devices. Yeah, I see people walking around with iPads now, but it's
Yeah.
actually for educational purposes.
Right. So the question was, can the kid use the iPad on Shabbos?
Ooh.
Right. So the person is a total bardas, total bardas.
Ah.
Use the iPad on Shabbos. So using the iPad is probably only a drabanan.
Hmm.
So some poskim said, well, a drabanan for a cholashen v'sakana is at least a cholashen v'sakana because he's not functioning normally, and you're allowed to violate a drabanan for a cholashen v'sakana. Rav Schachter said, no, you're not. You're allowed to violate a gzeira drabanan for a cholashen v'sakana. Typing in an iPad is a malacha of kosev midrabanan.
Ooh.
That you're not allowed to do for a cholashem sakana. He was makel anyway, but for a different reason.
Ah.
For a
Can't leave
different
us
reason.
hanging. Well, why was he Makel? Do
It
we
was
know
a
why?
tremendous chiddush. His chiddush was that if a person is unable to speak, that means that their mouth and their vocal cords are not doing what they were meant to do, and therefore it is not chol Hashem sakana, it's sakanas aver.
Wow.
Even though nothing's going to happen to these limbs of their body, they're not going to fall off, they're not going to atrophy, they're not going to. He held that it had a din of sakanas aver, and for sakanas aver, you're allowed to violate even a malachat rabban.
Right, that bumps it up. Wow, that. Now that's a remarkable chiddush there.
Yes.
But again, I guess that's his koach hasvara that he's using in order to be makel. And I know at the beginning of our discussion, you brought up from Moshe Feinstein, and I can't help but see some of the parallels. This isn't. I've observed this, of course, but Gedolim Tovim, many have made this assertion that that was part of what made his Piskei Halacha unique. That he didn't just, he's always contrasted with Chacham Avadia. Chacham Avadia, of course, had Koach Hasvar as well, but he tallied up a lot of the poskim, and Ramosha just. I actually saw Reb Ruvain. I think I may have quoted this on a previous episode. Reb Ruvain in his Pirkei Shalom and Pirkei Avos. I saw a footnote there that he says that Ramosha held that you can paskin based on what he said in his shiurim, i.e., the things that were written in the Dibros Moshe. There wasn't that clear bifurcation between the lumdus of the base medrash and the piskei halacha of the world. The lumdus is what led to the piskei halacha and created these novel psakim. And from what you're describing, I'm seeing like a huge parallel in Rav Schachter's methodology.
I'll tell you that Rav Schachter told us that when he was studying for smicha, the way he would test himself is he would open an Igros Moshe, look at what the shaila was, close the Igros Moshe, write his own tshuva, and then compare Rav Moshe's tshuva to his tshuva. And he said that the godless part of the godless of Rav Moshe, Rav Schachter said that, I was holding in these topics. I was step for step with him on the primary Gemara, the basic Machlokas and Rishonim, step for step. And then he pulls in a Gemara in Arachin, that has, he's like, I knew that Gemara. I knew that. I just never would have thought to apply it. And Rav Moshe had this ability to not just know Kala Torah Kula, but to have complete shlita over it, to have the full mastery
Yeah.
of it, to use it at any moment. So that's but it's
Wow,
not.
but that would be any chance there's a manuscript we could publish like Rav Schachter's I don't know what you want to call it, Peirush or not Hasagos, but we definitely don't need another mono Igros, but kind of like the supplement to learning Igros Moshe. I'm always looking for new supplements. I have the Psichas Igros, which I know you mentioned in your series with Ramosha that you've utilized. It's excellent. I tried to get Rev Roseman on the podcast, but I'll have to get him in a different capacity. Um, so we're coming to the end of our session together. And I'm wondering, A, if there's anything else about just the particular tshuva we looked at you want to share with us. And B, I just want to come back to Rav Schachter and his approach to Torah, his godless in general. Um, I'm speaking from the perspective of someone who just works as, your Joe pulpit rabbi. And I found during COVID his Piskei Halacha were so helpful because the content was very helpful, and B, it also it gave the decision making process a little bit more oomph. Like it wasn't just Moshe Kurtz decided we're doing X, Y, and Z, but we have the guidance of Rav Schachter who came down on paper and said that this is what we should do. And I almost wonder, maybe Klal Yisrael would benefit if we could get more Piskei Halacha from him. Has there been talk about that?
There's been a lot of talk about that. The thing with Gedolim is you can't tell them what to do. I think, I mean,
That's a good yesod.
during COVID, we realized that Rav Schachter, with his unending patience, was getting the same shilas
Mm,
10, 12 times a day and sat there talking it over. And we said, Rebbe, maybe if we could tell you what the big shilas are that are coming up among the Rabbanim, you could write a tshuva. And we had a group of us that would type it up for him, and then we'd go over it with him on the phone at night. And we didn't, you'll notice the English was not a direct translation.
yes.
We would write the summary in English, and he would go over every word with us to make sure that it was how he wanted it presented. And we would point out things that this might be understood by people to mean something else, or we'd work through that. After COVID, we said, "This is great. We got to keep doing this." He hasn't been so excited about writing shuvas. He doesn't think the world needs his shuvas.
Mm.
So I disagree, but who might have disagreed?
Right. There's going to be a dissertation one day. You know how everyone goes through Rav Svarim, and you in the English it's like these huge chumras, and then you look at the footnotes in Hebrew, and like all of a sudden, I think don't hold me to it. I think many years ago I was looking into whether I can double knot my laces on Shabbos, and the friend he's like clearly usser, and then in the back I think he says, yeah, I don't see what's wrong with it. So I
I
wonder like
think
one
it's
day if
based on
someone's
Rav
gonna be doing
Moshe's
that with.
guidance to Rabbi Eider. I think when Rabbi Eider first published his Svarim, Rav Moshe told him you shouldn't put the kulas in English because people will misunderstand them. So Rabbi Eider himself, Zichrono Livracha, used to have the kulas in Hebrew.
Right. But it makes for a really fun shear because you put it in English at first, and then you say, but if we look in the back or we look at the original Hebrew, let's see what we're missing. Maybe I shouldn't be doing that. I don't know. So one other thing, and this is a question for me. It's a question that other Rabbanim wonder about is how should one understand? So whether it's the Piskei Corona or whether it's something in Be'ikvei Hatzon, is Rav Schachter giving, I want to phrase this correctly, like binding piskei halacha for members of the YU community, or should we see it more as halachic guidance? And just one like I think non-controversial case is many shuls. This is being recorded, unfortunately, over a year after October 7th, but the conflict is continuing. Many shuls followed his guidance originally to say Avinu Malkeinu. I don't know how many are still hanging on. And how should we understand when we get that kind of, I don't know what to call it, pesak or guidance? Like, should we see it as something that is a suggestion, or should we see it as this is the policy and standard for our community?
Right. I think that he does not view it as his psak being binding on anybody unless you ask him a shaila. If you ask him a shaila, that's a general rule, and you ask a posek a shaila and they give you an answer, you're supposed to follow that. I think he was convinced to allow his Piskei Halacha to be publicized because, as we know, there's a thirst for it. There are people that want to hear what he has to say, whether they're going to follow everything or not. But I don't think he views his Piskei Halacha as being binding on any particular community, even our own community. And even though at this point in yeshiva, it's pretty obvious and clear that while we do have a lot of Rosh Yeshiva, we have senior Rosh Yeshiva, but then we have Morenu Agon Rav Schachter Shlita, meaning he is like in his own category, so to speak. But even knowing that, and he probably does know that, although he would never say it. I don't think he views his psak as being binding on the whole Yeshiva University community.
Okay. And we have about 2 minutes left, so I want to just maybe Is there like one Rav Schachter anecdote or one lesson that you've learned over the years that you would want to share with us in conclusion? Anything that we should know about Rav Schachter I mean, you've touched on a lot of points already, but anything that maybe we don't appreciate enough about him, how the public sees him, that maybe we should be appreciating, maybe like about personally how he relates to other Jews. I think that's something that we don't hear about a lot.
Yeah, I'll tell you a story. Years ago, when I was a Rebbe in DRS high school, I had a Talmud who was in 12th grade. I was an 11th grade Rebbe, but this Talmud was, already the next year out of my shiur. And he came over to me one day and he said that he's struggling whether he should go to Israel for the year after he finishes high school or not. He's not sure. So I said, why not? And he said that his father, unfortunately, he was a little bit of Ben Zekunim. His father had Alzheimer's,
Right.
and he was the last child in the house, and the father was still at home, and he didn't really recognize him or the mother anymore, and the mother was struggling a lot. And he said, I'm just not sure if I can leave my mother. And the situation was interesting. And the father was the more from influence in the house, I would say, but he was no longer, obviously an influence. And this Talmud said, I asked my Rebbe, his current Rebbe, and my Rebbe told me that I need to ask a gadol. So can you put me in touch with Rav Schachter? So I said, I'll tell you what. I'm driving Rav Schachter home from a shiur. He's giving the five towns tonight. We'll call you from the car. So first, I asked Rav Schachter in advance, would Rebbe have time to speak to a young Talmud who's struggling with something? He said, yeah, let me put it on my calendar. He took out his little pocket calendar and he said, what about Motzai Shabbos? First, he said, when's his bedtime? I said, he's a senior in high school. He doesn't have bedtime. So he said, so maybe next Motzai Shabbos at 12 o'clock. That was the next open slot he found on his calendar. So I
Wow.
said, Rebbe, instead of that, how about we call him from the car on the way home? He said, okay, that's a good idea. So we called him from the car. And Rav Schachter, again, patiently and sensitively, crying the whole time, explained to the boy what the obligations of Kibbutz Avim are and how to be extremely sensitive to his mother at the same time to make sure that he's able to grow religiously. And he encouraged him to go to Israel, and he gave him certain guidelines. We don't have to go through right now about how to make sure that he's being sensitive, properly sensitive to his mother. And a year later, the boy called me. And he said, Rav Schachter was just in yeshiva at Aryeh, where the boy was learning, a couple of weeks ago. And I was waiting to talk to him, to thank him for the encouragement, because this has been such a life-changing year for me. And he left before it became my turn to get him in line. Can you just tell him thank you for me? So
Hmm.
I said, I said, of course. And I said, it happens to be tonight. I'm driving him somewhere. I used to drive him from time to time. And I was all ready to tell Rav Schachter about this, thinking if he's even going to remember or not remember. I picked up Rav Schachter from his apartment. He got into the car, and I said, Rebbe, can I just tell you something? He said, before you tell me anything, I don't want to forget. Remember a year ago we spoke
Oh, wow.
to a boy. How's he doing? Is he okay? And I was like, a man with the worries of the Jewish people on his shoulders, and who hears 10 stories like this a day. And he continues to daven for all of them. And it's just incredible. His level of sensitivity and care for other people is like nothing I've ever seen.
And I think that's truly what makes him one of the great poskim of our generation. Is like you said, he's not Rabbi Google. He has the koach hasvara, which even just in the realm of learning makes him unique. But it's that really caring for the entire Am Yisrael, caring for every individual within Am Yisrael. I think that's truly what sets him apart from many people whom I could think of. And well, my hope only is that, God willing, in a few episodes from now or some point in the future, we'll be having a Talmud Mufak of yourself come on to present your Torah as well, Rabbi Lebowitz. We'll put some links in the show notes for those who want to purchase Rabbi Lebowitz's new book. I'll get the REIT's website link, and just continue Hatzlacha. And thank you so much for all you do for my personal learning and for the learning of all of Klal Yisrael.
Thank you very much. I
Well,
appreciate it.